Vinoo, under the banner of cause of death, is Eric Nelson finding his way to reasonable doubt?
Well, I think reasonable doubt existed in this case, but the problem here again is Nelson himself. Chauvin brought a knife to a gunfight. I've said that before and I say it again. One of the things you have to do as a defense attorney is have that conference with the judge and talk about how long you're going. And this is where I agree with Joey on this. You've got to avoid a situation where you're interrupted, or you have to have that interruption planned so that when you come back from lunch, the next voice isn't that of the prosecution. Here, the judge may have actually saved him by giving him a lunch break. But I want to talk about some of the things he said. I mean, he's talking about things like space aliens and baking a cake. It's like the prosecution has to bake a cake as chocolate chip cookie. Man, this is a murder case. You don't make it that simple. I talked about keeping it simple, but not that simple, not that stupid. What you want to say is, look, this is a puzzle. The prosecution has to complete this puzzle, and they have to do it, and if the pieces don't fit, you must acquit. These are the things that he needs to be saying. But when he's had a couple of good moments when he's talked about different perspectives, right? That the jury, we're at different points, you can't see me, but that he undercut that own point when he talked about the expert being able to watch it for many, many, many hours, which is what he's asking the jury to do. And he kept going on and on about the reasonable officer. The reasonable officer did this, reasonable officer did that. He didn't tie it into Chauvin. He's got to say, look, this is what Derek was dealing with. He's got to humanize him. And, Joey spoke about unmasking him. Why would you wait till summation to take the mask off? You've got either you do it at the beginning or you do it there, or don't do it at all. And if you look at Chauvin, he looks like your classic cop meathead, the kind of guy who's a bully in high school who then becomes a cop because he loves power. This is the stereotype that people are going to have. He is not a sympathetic looking figure. So keep him under that mask. You've got to prepare a jury also, and maybe he's going to do this, for what they're going to hear in a rebuttal summation. He's opened up certain points that he's going to get hammered in rebuttal. But we'll see what he does when he comes back and whether he's going to prepare them for that rebuttal.
Vinoo, if you're advising Nelson, what do you tell him to do? How much longer does he go, and what points does he bring out to wrap it up?
Well, this comes back to timing and making sure that you don't leave a situation where the rebuttal summation is tomorrow morning. Can't have that. So you have to have asked the judge to make sure that the rebuttal summation doesn't go long. Look, this is one of the great and terrible things in the law, where the prosecution gets to go twice at the end. This is what happens in federal court. This is what's happening in Minnesota State Court. In New York State Court, the defense goes, the prosecution goes. There's no rebuttal summation. So he's got to be careful here, and he's got to say, look, when I sit down, you're not going to hear from me again, and you're going to hear from the state again. And if they bring up something that I didn't address, ask yourself, what would I say in that moment? Don't leave it unchallenged. And one of the things he kept doing is apologizing. Don't apologize. Look, I understand I'm going long, but I have to. The prosecution spent weeks in front of you. We had this case for a couple of days. I need to summarize this, and it's going to take me a while. If my client's freedom and life weren't at stake, then I wouldn't be saying this kind of stuff. I wouldn't have to argue all of this. But he doesn't have that oomph to him. He had a couple moments where he got a little testy, and I like that. I was happy to see that, because we want to, in the end, ensure that Chauvin gets a fair trial. Now, he's raised some good points, and I think he's done very well. And if he believes, and if you agree with
forgive me for interrupting, but court's begun again. Let's go there. Vinoo Varghese, as you take in this entire day of closings, who do you think carried the day, prosecution or defense?
Well, I'll say this. At the end of the day, when we were going to the rebuttal summation, I was thinking that Blackwell would crush Nelson, just observing Blackwell, who I think did a great job throughout the trial. But it wasn't really so. I mean, he had a couple good and, well, I would say a couple cute lines with Chauvin having heart not being big enough. That's what he ended on. But Nelson, again, failed to vaccinate the jury to hear what Blackwell had said. So to the extent that Blackwell did deliver some zingers, Nelson should have vaccinated the jury and said to them, look, you're not going to hear from me again. But if he brings up something that wasn't covered by me, ask yourself how I would answer that, and please play that role. Don't let him get away with the statement that's been unanswered. Now, at the end of this is where it got really interesting with the objections that Nelson made and moving, I guess he sort of moved for a mistrial, at least that's the way the judge interpreted the motion. What Nelson should have done is ask the judge to poll the jury. Look, Judge, yeah, I understand the law presumes that they're going to follow instructions, but this isn't a normal case. This is the trial of the 21st century. Poll these jurors. You have a congresswoman, and you agree, Judge, that this congresswoman is out of bounds and shouldn't be saying this, and maybe inciting a riot. So why don't you ask the juries if they are aware of anything? And then Nelson, not in his defense, in the prosecution's defense, could have been more specific about some of the television shows that he mentioned. But this is a critical moment here. And Nelson should have pushed the judge to poll the jury. He didn't do that. This judge, I mean, for the most part, I think he's done a decent job. And I think for the first time today, I thought he gave some stability, or at least some support to the defense, properly that is, by dealing with the mistrial motion and the comments that I brought up earlier, which are appellate issues. The characterization of the defense as storytelling or nonsense. Even the judge brought it up better than Nelson did. And he addressed that. But I think this judge is afraid of what the jury's going to say, and he's more concerned with media coverage or positive media coverage than actually making sure that Chauvin got a fair trial. This judge is the first judge in Minnesota to allow television in the courtroom. He certainly wasn't going to grant a mistrial. That's clear. But that's a problem, and I think it's going to give Chauvin life on appeal. Now, ultimately, I believe he's going to get convicted of everything.
Got it. Joey Jackson. Eric Nelson, correct me if I'm wrong, went as far as to hint that the prosecution didn't like in full Dr. Baker's findings, so they have to get Tobin to bolster that. Do you think that would resonate with this jury?
I think he should have gone harder on that. And I think you characterized it correctly, Mike, by calling it hinting at it. He didn't go harder on that. He could have said to them, how many cases do you have where you have more than one medical examiner testifying? I know the professor spoke about this earlier today when he talked about this was the first time that he saw a case where they call another medical examiner to basically rebut the one who did the final autopsy. And in the end, what he did, though, what I thought was effective, in between his manners of how he argued, or his lack of forcefulness in the way that he argued, he did methodically bring out the arguments that each of these experts did. And he tied it all together by making one strong point, by saying that it was nonsense in responding to the prosecutor's completely improper statement in his in his initial summation, by saying that it was nonsense, that none of these other factors of George Floyd, his heart, his drug abuse, played any role in this. And I think that if the jury, or at least there are enough people, if I recall correctly, there's a chemist on that jury, or at least there was initially, that if you look at it from a scientific point of view, we've talked about the RN maybe becoming dominant figure, but if that chemist is there, or somebody who has some understanding of science is there, they're going to be like, yeah, it is nonsense to say that none of these other things played any role. Now, the question comes back to, was Chauvin's knee the substantial cause of his death? Or with this, if you look at Dr. Baker's testimony, which was that it's undetermined because there are too many factors here. I think Nelson scored some points there, despite some other issues I had with his summation.
Got it. Vinoo, are you tracking with Eric Nelson on that point at 8:25:16 that the crowd level, the volume of the crowd is raising, so hence they're now a distraction?
I think this is the problem with Nelson and his whole demeanor and manner throughout the course of the trial. He's raised some good points, but he doesn't know how to argue them. This was a time where you've got to be strong and you've got to say and paint this picture in a manner that really lets the jury feel what Chauvin was feeling. And he fails to do that. When he starts saying things like, well, I'm not saying the paramedics should have done this or shouldn't have done that. What he should have done is laid out in his PowerPoint, laid out all these intervening factors, the lack of medical attention, the fact that they took all this stuff, and don't apologize. He kept apologizing. This is something that Nelson and unfortunately the majority of people in this country don't understand, is that there is no presumption of innocence. Chauvin is not presumed innocent. He's presumed guilty, as are almost all criminal defendants. Therefore, Nelson, especially in a trial like this, has to, practically speaking, prove his innocence. While he can argue that the burden is on the state and continue to argue that, he needed to be stronger. Look, he could have vaccinated the jury, and I've said this a few times already. He didn't prepare the jury for the prosecutor's rebuttal summation, right? So when the prosecutor in the rebuttal summation, Blackwell says, this is so simple that a 9-year-old understand it. Really, prosecutor? That was that simple? Why did you have 5 million witnesses? Why did you call 2,000 experts? Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but that's what it really was like. Yeah, when you look at this, that's the thing that, now Nelson, that's Nelson's fault. By saying, look, when I sit down, Blackwell's going to get up and say, look, this is a simple case, use your common sense. Of course he's going to argue common sense. I saw that coming from a mile away. What he could have said was, look, your common sense, what he's really, Blackwell is going to tell you is ignore logic. Ignore the reality of the situation that tells you, they're telling you that his drug use, his heart condition, his COVID, all this stuff, none of that was a factor? Come on, folks, use your common sense and don't let that nonsense argument distract you from what's really going on, and that Chauvin is not guilty of these crimes.
So he tried, but you don't think he brought it home in full. And again, we're letting you listen to some of the key moments here.